It's a story about how a small throwaway remark can change your life. And this involves a visit I had in my earlier life to South Africa, where I met an Australian chap who suggested if I wanted to go to Australia, why not do it by motorcycle? And the upshot of that was, over a summer and quite a few head scratchings, and well, we were looking for the right bike for a start, and we ended up with this Norton. It's a 1960 vintage. Started life as a twin cylinder. So anybody that knows anything about Nortons, that originally was a Dominator 99. And the acquisition of this machine was a story in itself. We'd been looking at various bikes, and we ended up, I was delivering some groceries up Borrowdale one day, and I saw this bike, this frame. The engine in it now is a single cylinder, and I'll go on to that in a minute. But the original bike was a twin cylinder, and it belonged to New Zealand chaps who I saw up Borrowdale on the side of the road. They'd been rock climbing. I thought, I wonder if they know anything about travelling overland to Australia. They'd maybe done it in reverse. Anyway, the upshot was I ended up buying the bike off them, and they were a pair of real grand chaps, and I ended up putting a single cylinder engine in it on the advice of a very good friend, a German. Well, no, he wasn't German. He absolutely insisted he was Bavarian, who worked for BMW, and later in his life he worked as a mechanic and engineer for the police bikes in Cumbria, or Cumberland and Westmoreland in those days. And he advised me, he says, don't bother with the twin. He says, the fuel will be like paraffin. He says, you need the lowest compression single cylinder engine you can get. And that ended up as that construction there. And this bike, yes, it was a faithful servant. The length of this journey we're about to embark on, it ended up about 8,000 miles, and that old bike averaged over 90 miles to the gallon, believe it or not. But you haven't to forget, we were just hobbling along at perhaps 40 or 45 miles an hour in a small convoy for most of the journey. And these pictures taken at a place called Middle Row Farm, which is quite near to, just adjacent to the what used to be the Blencathra Sanatorium at Threlkeld, up on the south slopes of Blencathra. And my father and mother moved there in 1948 with me as a 2-year-old, and there's a lot of stories I could tell, but I better hadn't because it would incriminate a few people. But lived happily there until this journey started. Excuse me. I left school in 1962 and started a 5-year apprenticeship on the county council, which I completed in 1967. And in 1967 August, I'd done all the paperwork, managed to get accepted to emigrate to South Africa. And that went ahead. I flew out there. I think it cost me £10, and stayed with my uncle in Johannesburg a bit, and then ended up, there's a lot of things happened. I worked down in a part of the country called the Little Karoo Desert on a highway construction job, and ended up in Port Elizabeth. And well, unfortunately, whilst in Port Elizabeth, I ended up being stabbed in the back, which was quite dramatic at the time. Thankfully, I've lived to tell the tale. And I decided that was it, I had enough. I was heading down the coast, down what's called the Garden Route to Cape Town. And when you get to Cape Town, if you're a bit of a hobo, traveller type person, you always end up in what's called the Kloof Neck Youth Hostel. And if you look at Cape Town and you see Table Mountain, on the Atlantic end of Table Mountain is a smaller hill, and in that little gap in the middle it's called Kloof Neck, and that's where the youth hostel is. And that's where I came across these Aussie chaps, one of whom was called George Nicol, a very interesting man. His father was a white Russian, walked out of Russia and found his way to Australia and set up a string of barber shops of all things. And yeah, him and his mate, who I never ever did find his second name, we all just called him Horse. And we were chatting about travel, and I said, oh, well, I wouldn't mind going to Australia. And I said, and we knew that I liked riding motorbikes. And he says, well, why not ride one overland to Australia? And that was where that first little grain of an idea came into being. They set off, should I say, they got employed on some cruise ships where the light white English-speaking people that serve all the retired Americans on these 80-day cruises. And that journey, I'd already bought a ticket back to England on the Southern Cross of all things, the one where all the immigrants went towards Australia. And then we got the return leg, and I ended up back in England really in about February 1968. Well, this idea, it wouldn't go out of my head, and we chatted away, and my very good friend Clive Stewart, again a resident of Threlkeld, born and bred, and we worked at it, and eventually it all took a shape, and this tremendous undertaking, it appears like that now, but at the time it was just another ride out on the motorbike, took shape. And on the fateful day of 19th of September 1969, two of us set sail down the A6, I suppose, and the A5. There wasn't much by way of motorway, and we ended up in London, and we got a new tyre fitted and various things, and the journey was starting to take shape there. That's the farm where I spent most of my life, and I ended up being a farmer there. And the picture you saw on the back of the house, you can just see there's a car stood up behind the barn there on the back of the house, and that's where that picture was taken. And there's another story altogether about the farm, and that's looking due north from St John's in the Vale, and you see the little strip of trees on the fell bottom with all the buildings in them. That is Blencathra Centre, or it used to be Blencathra Hospital, and it's now an outdoor field study centre. And the larger building to the right is Middle Row Farm. That's basically the route we took. Right, now there's a very interesting photograph. That's our first camp up. Little one-pole tent, blacks of Greenock it was, and what a wonderful piece of kit. And the reason I'm pointing at that little red bag on my waist there is, as we were leaving London, we pulled up at some traffic lights, and Clive had this bag, he just held it between us, and the bus driver behind us pipped his horn and pointed, and we looked, and there's that little red bag lying on the road, and in it was all our money, passports, any documentation we thought we'd needed, and that would have been the end of that. We would have never got past Dover if we hadn't stopped and picked that bag up. So that night, when the first night we got into France, that day, the first night, I took my knife out and put 2 slits in it, and that bag went on my belt, and there it stayed for the rest of the journey, and it's still lying somewhere in our attic, I think. And that was the start of the journey. We were on our way then. France was nothing spectacular. A simple picture of a chalet on our way to Switzerland, where we stayed with a fella, Alan Aldian, and then we eventually progressed through the Mont Blanc tunnel, which we were really on an adventure then, and we'd never been to Europe, either of us, and we were driving along with our mouths hanging up and at the spectacular Alps in general, and down the Aosta Valley, as it was, well, still down there, but it's a motorway now. And there's Clive with the rugged background in it, absolutely fabulous. We were still sort of finding our way a little bit, in as much as how to set up camp and everything, but it soon became a bit of a routine. And 827 JJH there, it just never failed, kept going. And we 1 or 2 pictures, I think, of Aosta Valley. There's another one, that's another chap. I think he looks closely, quite like somebody I knew was a long time ago, slim with hair. That's a shot taken at a campsite in the bottom of Lago di Garda in Italy. We got across northern Italy fairly fast. And you have to remember that during, like this is a long time ago, and photography was very expensive, and it's my eternal regret I didn't take a lot more pictures or images. But anyway, that was just one morning, and yeah, we must have been able to change money and buy food and stuff. And of course we moved more eastwards and down into what was Yugoslavia. We went to Zagreb and then down to Belgrade and then farther down, and I can't remember because they've all changed now, but that was more or less the middle bit between the top of the Adriatic and the Greek coast. And that town still exists, and where Clive was leaning on the bike about 10 seconds after he'd walked off the camera shot, the bike fell over. We hadn't got a big enough stand on it. It didn't quite make as good contact with the ground as possible. That one's of the Greek countryside. We were heading for a place called Thessaloniki, which proved quite a rewarding job because we must have stayed in a youth hostel or somewhere or whatever, and we were encouraged to go to the local hospital and donate blood. And we got $10 each for it, which was absolutely marvellous, and that in those days was quite a tidy sum. I have to remember that for this trip we left Threlkeld in the Lake District with 150 quid and a youth hostel map of Europe, destination somewhere on the other side of the world. Anyway, we got that far, we're doing grand, and by the time we got to Istanbul, you're serious. If you go over the Bosphorus, which then you had to cross by boat, there was neither bridge nor hotels, it was just ferries. If you crossed the Bosphorus, you were serious. A lot of people went as far as Istanbul, but they never went any further beyond. And I can't remember exactly how or when or what, but we became part of a convoy. And it was quite interesting. There was a young chap and his wife, Ian Rice, and his wife and two kids. That's again in the Greek countryside. And we got into this convoy, of which that's the chap Ian Rice with a white shirt on, and that's his Land Rover, and he had two kids, which you'll see a picture later on of Ian and these two kids and his wife, and they were, I think, 4 and 6 or something like that. That was a big ambition. That was an ambitious thing in those days. The convoy consisted of Ian and his wife in the Land Rover, another couple in a long wheelbase Land Rover, a bit older than that was nearly new, 3 Australian lads in a Bedford Dormobile, that's an image to play with, who had to leave Britain fairly sharpish for reasons we better not discuss. There was 3 lasses and 3 lads in a Volkswagen camper van, and these 2 silly lads on a motorbike, and that was our convoy. And you can see the old bike in behind the street lamp or whatever it is, and that's in Tehran, if I remember rightly. And we'd likely set up camp. You can see a little tent there and everything. And Tehran, we left Istanbul, went to Ankara, then up towards the Black Sea to follow, so that the big problem was that by the time that had happened, that time of year, the roads through the middle of Turkey could be blocked by snow because they're quite high up. And so we headed from Ankara up towards the Black Sea coast and left, went to a place called Samsun, and then further along the coast to Trabzon, and then we took a dive south into the middle of eastern Turkey to a place called Erzurum. And even to this day, they have a big problem in that part of Turkey with wolves, and I mean they are real enough. We stopped just before Erzurum and decided we'd have something to eat, and it was sort of dusk, and one of the lassies out of the Volkswagen, she says, "I'll have to go and answer the call to nature." Well, 5 minutes later she came back, she says, "I've got this terrible feeling I'm being watched." And we said, "No, there's nobody else here." Anyway, as it turns out, she was being watched. And poor lass Ginny, she'd been and answered a call of nature, and as it turns out, Ian's Land Rover, it had like a spotlight on the front, and this is sort of twilight, we know, it's early evening, and he shone his spotlight into the woodlands where she'd just come from, and there was about 12 pairs of eyes watching us. Attached to big furry bodies, I can assure you. Well, you've never seen anything like it. The soup and that we were prepared and all went out, and everything got chucked in the back of vehicles, and off we went. And we didn't stop till we got to this place called Zurum. And anybody that's been to Turkey, especially in a rural part of Turkey, will know they've got these great big dogs. They're called Kangal dogs, and by God they are big. You wouldn't want to argue with one. And I can remember one day we were climbing up an incline, and of course you drive not right, and it was a slope up to our left, and out of the corner of my eye I saw one of these great big things come hurtling down this path heading towards the road. And I thought, hey up, if that thing hits us, we're off the bike, because they could weigh 100 weight of me. And so I remember now, on instinct, I drove up the driver's side of the Land Rover on its right hand side. As we passed the end of this little track where this dog was coming down, it hurtled across the road and hit right into the passenger side of the Land Rover, shook its head and ran back. And if that had hit us, we would have been in a different scenario. So anyway, we got into Azurum, and by then we were pretty well oiled sort of how would you say it, management of everything. Usually stopped in a police compound just for security, and we would have a paddle into Azurum next morning, and to our amazement there was all these wolf hides hanging. They'd been skinned like and they'd cured, and these things must have been best part of 7 foot from the tip of the snout to the end of the tail. And poor Jenny, I think it's changed the constitution for quite a while, but anyway, it was an experience. They are real, and they would have you. Anyway, we left eastern Turkey, and where we came to because some of us have joined a thing called the Masonic Order. The Mount Ararat was a very important thing, because that's where Noah's Ark's supposed to rest after the Great Flood. And we were getting near to the Turkish border, and we just pulled up. We'd gone up onto this little hill end, as you can see from the image there, and all of a sudden, all this calamity behind us, these soldiers came running towards us, and we must have been in a bit of a sensitive zone. But thankfully, Clive, who was a smoker, pulled his hands out of his pocket, and this packet of cigarettes spilled onto the ground. They were all over the floor, maybe 12 or 15 cigarettes, and we are running like mad down to our vehicles. They saw the cigarettes, stopped and started picking them up, and in the meantime, we'd gone. And that was getting very close to the border with Iran, and Iran. Well, it really was an eye-opener, because we'd heard all sorts of things. But in those days, that's when the king, they had a monarchy, and the king of Persia, and they were very, very friendly. We hadn't had any problems up to then, and the friendliness became more and more as further east we went, because the Iranians, the Afghanis and Pakistanis, and they could not do enough for us. And we ended up in this images here of a bit of a pit stop, do the laundry, get some groceries sorted out, catch your breath, and set off again. There's some pretty severe mountains between Tehran and the Black Sea, and you can see it's white on the top. It was cold. And we just stopped to, Clive wanted a fag, and we just stopped, and I thought, well, that sort of sums the kind of countryside and the time of year as well. And there is another one where we went up this valley to pass through the mountains towards the Caspian Sea now, and there'd been a landslide, and the road had been washed away, and it was quite a bit of an ordeal. You can see where the road was and where it should have been, anyway, we managed to get through it. Then we carried on, and we got up to the Caspian Sea and spent a couple of days. We actually went swimming in the Caspian Sea, and had quite a good time, charging our batteries up a bit. And then, of course, we end up in this town here. You can see the Golden Temple in the sort of middle distance there. Is a town called Mashhad, and that is in far northeastern Iran. And you're getting close to Afghanistan there. You can just see the Land Rover wing on the right hand there. But things were starting to... Modern cars were a fair bit of a rarity, and of course they all wear different attire, long course, but they will be starting to be westernised in those days. And a wonderful place, stayed there and then carried on, and we ended up in going for the border. And oh, you can see there, that's still in Mashhad, and that was like a monument for the city, but the bit you can see from the bike, there's no front mudguard. Well, we'd hit a bit of dirt road. The roads hadn't been so bad until then, pretty well all paved, very rare that there was any mud or anything, and we get this bit of road and down we went. First time we'd fell off it, but it was about 2 miles an hour, and what had happened was the mud had got stuck in between the tyre and the front mudguard, and it was sort of locking the front wheel. I said, well, the only thing we can do here is to take the mudguard off. So we did, and got going again. Well, we got into Mashhad, and the bike was absolutely caked in mud, so we just cleaned it off as best we could, fitted the mudguard back on, and away we went. Well, once you get east of Mashhad, you're getting close to the Afghan border, and we ended up in a little town. There's really 3 principal towns in Afghanistan: Herat, Kandahar and Kabul. Well, the first place we went to was Herat, and these guys, it's a you're very much under Eastern influence now. And these old boys, they were all walking around with like homemade muskets and stuff, and we had to stop there, and the chap with the white t-shirt on, he's one of the lads out of the Dormobile and of course Clive, and these youngsters, they were just wanted fun. They just kick a football about or anything, just they were so friendly. And we worked away from there, and there's one of our campsite next in Herat. That's actually quite an interesting one, the next one. There's the full convoy. There's the Volkswagen, the blue Land Rover, the white Land Rover with the pop top, and the Dormobile. There's something different in there, I can't remember what it was. But anyway, there's a very good looking fella right at the bottom corner there, leaning on a van door. That again was basically, you found a stop like that and you can see all the washing out on the washing line. You just to catch up, to catch your breath and to take stock of where and how far you'd travelled, you see. And by then we were definitely a convoy. Of going down a street, there's the Land Rover again. That lad right in the centre, he was out of the Volkswagen, and he was a very keen photographer, and he was forever taking snaps, and might have even been a bit of cine as well. But you can see from the 2 chaps on the left here the kind of outfit they were wearing, and they were all like that, with like a turban type headgear. And they looked at it, but Herat, it wasn't, they weren't that overwhelmed by Western people, because you could go to Herat and you could buy probably a kilogram of first grade hashish for about £1, and it was full of druggies basically. Any Westerners you saw, they were either spaced out or they were begging for a bit of money, and it cost almost nothing to live. You could live on 10p a day, you know, nice bread, plenty of cheese and that kind of thing, and jams and meat. Well, we were a bit careful with meat. And that's what would have been a typical street in Herat in 1969. So we completed our stop and got gathered up, and we set off again, and then we're out into the desert, and that's typical Afghani countryside. And I mean, there's nothing. There was a pole which I leaned back against, and we all just stopped for a bit of a gather up, you know, and a crack. And you can just see the road in the background above the bike there, and that that road from Herat down to Kandahar is about 300 miles, but it's concrete. And the one from Herat to Kandahar was built by the Russians, and then the Americans weren't going to be outdone. So from Kandahar up to Kabul, which is sort of two sides of a triangle, they built the other 300 mile, and it's a perfectly good surface. And they were speeding along on the concrete road, and you can see from the countryside there wasn't a blade of anything green. It's just dry and arid countryside, really quite remarkably difficult to farm and travel. And we stayed Kandahar for a while, just probably overnight, and decided Kabul it was. So we set off and we were on our way northeast, like it's southeast from Herat to Kandahar, and then south to northeast to go up to Kabul. And while we were going up this concrete road towards Kabul, the Land Rovers had a puncture. And it was like it was a sandstorm. It was pretty grim actually. You had to wear something over your face because your eyes got filled with grit, and thankfully we had goggles. And we quickly got the tyre changed, and thankfully they had good kit to change their tyres, and headed up towards Kabul. That's taken from where we were staying, just on the fringes of Kabul. And you can see there's green trees and stuff around compounds and stuff where there was a trickle of water, but the rest of it is so arid. And to be great dismay, we never really took any more photographs of Kabul. And by then, we set off out of Kabul. Now we're on the road from Kabul down to the Khyber Pass. And this countryside, we'd never seen anything like it. It was so dry. It was hard to believe that people actually lived there. And there was plenty of water, but no greenery. And we just took a couple of shots. You can see in the very back, the far distance, the white, that's the end of the Hindu Kush, the end of the Himalayan range. That's its most westerly end, I suppose. And the weather was good, but cold. But as we went nearer and nearer to the Khyber Pass, the weather certainly warmed up. Just as a point of interest, on that shot, you can see on the bottom of the centre stand the bike's on. There's two bars across. The top one is the standard one, but the bottom one I got some fellas to weld a bit on because the centre stand wouldn't touch the ground properly and the bike kept falling over. So you just get these jobs done as you're travelling along. So we left Kabul, and that's another shot. A bit of greenery, a bit of trees and greenery where there's water. And this shot here is on the road between Kabul and the Khyber Pass, and I've watched a few travel programs on TV, and this has been featured. And you can see where the road, it's like tunnels, and it's like spirals down, and then you go out at the bottom, and it was an unbelievably spectacular gorge, and everything went through that road, went on that road and tunnel. And that road and tunnel is still there today, still being used by goods and general traffic. And not a very brilliant photograph, I'll take it, but it does show the extent of the terrain. This is the Khyber Pass for what it's not a pass as we would think, like Hardknot or any other passes. It's really just a break in the mountains, because the original road is in the low bit, and the newer version is higher up. And we just travelled along. You can see the greenery in the background, and they do get a lot of rain, but it all comes at once. And you can see the big culvert things in the bottom where it lets all the water through. But that's the road through the Khyber Pass, and well, you're into Pakistan basically. And then we travelled on. Things started to change. Landscape changed, the people changed. They were still very, very friendly, were the locals, and we ended up. We had some trouble. The first real trouble of the journey as regards any kind of paperwork. And we went down through Rawalpindi, I think, and we crossed the border at a little place called Amritsar, where the Golden Temple of Amritsar is. Well, that's the border town, about 20 miles from the actual border crossing. And that's when we hit a snag, and it took 2 days to get the paperwork sorted. And that's a legacy of the British Empire. They'd adopted the quadruplicate everything, and the paperwork was just ridiculous. And the poor old lad, a man in Amritsar, he was an absolute godsend. He was an angel. He helped us, sorted the paperwork. I had to stay over a night in Amritsar, and I got the bus back to the ferry, to the border crossing the following day. And in the meantime, the convoy, including Clive, had set off, and they'd gone down to Delhi. Well, I got back, got the bike out, and it was about 250 miles down to Delhi. Time I got down to Delhi, and for a place that size, there was no sat-nav or anything in there, but I had an address, and I miraculously found them on this camping youth hostel type place right in the middle of Delhi, when Clive announced that he'd had enough and he was coming back to England. And we'd agreed to differ, and we had a real set till, a real good barney. And he cabled home for the airfare to fly home, and he flew out of Delhi the next day. But we shook hands on good terms. And then the journey changed in essence, because I was on my own then, on the bike. And by then though, a lot of the lasses, and they liked to go on the back of the bike, because it was cool. The weather had got much warmer by then. And then we made it from Delhi down to Agra, where a must-see is the Taj Mahal. And this image, you can see I've no shoes on. Well, you're not allowed to visit the Taj Mahal if you wear shoes and socks. You've got to go barefoot. It's a religious site, of course. And that's on the western side of the actual Taj Mahal itself. And it's one of the great wonders of the world. And you'll see from the shadows, and the recommendation always was to visit the Taj Mahal early in the morning, not that long after sunrise, because when you get up to the height of the sun, the marble is so white and reflects so much, it's quite hard to look at. And I took quite a few little images of the Taj Mahal. A wonderful place. If you're anywhere in northern India, you do not visit. It is just spectacular, and you can see from the shadows how early in the morning it is. And you can also see down on the left there the masses of people going in, and I mean there are masses. There's literally hundreds and even thousands of people visit every day, and it is off the scale for spectacular ornamentation and carving, and the sheer size of it is really, it takes your breath away. And we dawdled a bit. And there are some of the guys out of the convoy, Brian Douglas and his wife with the pink dress on, and another of the lads out of I can't remember who the lass with the blue dress is, but the lad with the beard, he was one of the lads out of the Dormobile camper. And you can see from that distance even how ornate it all is. Absolutely fabulous, really an eye-opener of a trip. And we went, and by then we were travelling down. We were headed for a town called Nagpur. I think it's Nagpur, N-A-G-P-U-R, Nagpur. And we just travelled along one day, and we came across this herd of cows. They're not very fat, I can tell you. They're gay lean. And what intrigued me was a lot of them have got like flowers up on their arms and stuff. But I was looking at the middle one here on the front. It's earmarks. I mean, we were sheep farmers, and I eventually became one myself, and we earmarked all our sheep with you mutilate their ears basically, and that, you can recognise whose cattle's what or whose sheep are whose. And I thought it was quite intriguing, but what struck me most was how lean they were. There wasn't a lot of pickings. Of course, cows are sacred in India. There was quite a few who would come to grief on the roads. you took your life in your hands, especially after dark. You didn't travel after dark simply because you couldn't be certain you weren't going to hit some of these things, like because the road would be warm in the night, and they knew where the best spots were to settle for the night. And and we just travelled on, and that's south of where we saw those cattle. Now, that day I'd only 2 breakdowns with the old bike. For anybody that knows out about mechanics, especially motorbikes, the clutch basket's held together with 3 nuts and bolts. They're like double-ended bolts really, with a nut on the back and then one on the front where you tension the springs. And the nut on the back had come off one of the bolts, and it was slipping and dragging all at the same time. So absolutely, when you stop in a little village or a town like that, within minutes there'll be 20, 30 or more people will be there, and they just stare at you because you're white, and they've maybe never seen many white people. And if that day I had to lay the bike down on its timing side, on it like its throttle side if you would, and took the clutch cover off. I wasn't long offending a problem, fixed it, put it all back together, and the crowds appeared. But if you get a stick or something and you mark a line, you know, say 5 feet away from where you're working, and you mark a line in the sand, in the muck, they won't come over it. But they'll stand and look at you, they'll stare at you as if staring at you was doing them a bit of good. I don't know, it didn't do us lot any good, I'm sure. And the other little mishap I had with the bike was the fact that it started misfiring, and I thought, oh God, this is disaster. You know, the magnetos packing up. These were magdynos on these old bikes, and they're pretty reliable. And Joe Muggins, in his majesty, when I rebuilt the bike, which I'd rebuilt it completely new, big end piston, the whole thing, I had the mag to bits, and anybody that knows how to put magnetos, there's what's called the slip ring, and there's a carbon brush on a spring-loaded carbon brush, touches the commutator segment, and that's where the electricity leaves the magneto, goes up into the plug lead and up to the plug. And it's a tiny spring, maybe 3 or 4 mil diameter, hardly that. And being clever, I thought, oh well, I'll put 2 in to be on safe side. And unfortunately, what had happened, the 2 springs had got coil bound, and they weren't allowing the carbon brush to hit the commutator segment or ring. And took one of them out, put it all back together, timed it up with a screwdriver, bingo, away it went. And that was one of the joys, with hindsight, of having a low-tech machine. Anything with electronics and stuff nowadays, you know, well, if you break down, you've got to have a technician. Those old things, you can mend them with a hammer and a screwdriver pretty well anywhere. And we were travelling along one day, and it's quite rugged country. There's what's called ghats. They're like hill spots, and they always had somewhere for accommodation. There must be a lot of travellers in India, and that kind of rugged terrain with you can see it's all rocky and stuff, and there's a few cows, and we just came across these buffalo, and they're just in there in the water, and absolutely stunning image, and they never moved. We just got off the bike, walked over, took some pictures, and then the 2 youngsters out of their white Land Rover, and they'll have had a trip they'll remember all their lives. And that was Brian with the beard on the left, and we just walked right up to the edge of, I thought buffalo were wild. Well, they maybe are, but they seemed to be pretty quiet. They knew where they were well off, and there was just this like waterhole, mud hole thing, and there they were lying in it. And that's an image of India I'll never forget. So we set off, we travelled further south. I just took a picture of a field. We didn't know what it was, but it was green. And it's rice, basically. We realised eventually it's rice. So when you're getting into southern India, it's not all barren and dry. There are areas where it's very productive, and well, they eat a lot of rice, I suppose. So yeah, and that was one of the last images before we got down to Madras, or I think it's Chennai or something to call it now, but it was Madras then. Well, it'll still be Madras now, and that's down in the harbour. with the old SS Regula, that old tank there. I think it was built in the 1920s in Glasgow, and the old Nortons are waiting to be hauled on board, and you were really not, there was plenty of photographs saying no photographs in the dock, but anyway I sneaked an odd one in, odd one or two, and that was our transport from Madras over to Singapore, and that's third class accommodation. Thankfully we were in cabins, and I can assure anybody who's watching this, after you've spent weeks and weeks camping and sleeping in a tent, when you get on a bed, it's far too soft. And I couldn't do it for a few nights. I just slept on the floor in my sleeping bag. But that was just looking from our partition bit, that's looking down into third class travel. And it was busy. And they were carried all sorts. If I remember rightly, when they hauled the old Norton up and dropped it in the hold, on like a long rope, there was I don't know how many ton of onions followed it in, bags and bags of onions that would be going from India over to Singapore. There's the old Norton hanging by its for all it's worth, going down into the hold, and that was a gang of people who were on the ferry, and what a great week we had. Eventually we ended up in Singapore, and I spent about 2 weeks in Singapore, and then we got on what the MV, I think they're called, Centaur, and that took us from Singapore down to Fremantle in Western Australia, and a much more modern boat, and again what a wonderful week we had. Swimming pool, and if I'm not sure, that's a lady with very little on underneath. I've covered her modesty with my right elbow, but to prove that I did have hair once, and I wasn't as fat as I am now, and it was the first step into Australia, Port of Fremantle, and that was mission accomplished in that sense. And our journey hadn't finished though, in that sense. We got it, and there's another one of that's definitely Australia, unloading onto Australian soil. They were much more capable and much more security minded, not just a bit of old rope to hang the old bike off. And that's in a chap we met on somewhere. One of the lads knew this fella who had a house in Perth, and I camped in his back garden for about 3 weeks because we were about cleaned out. We had no money, lived off Vegemite and toast for quite a lot of days, and then started to get a job, a bit of work, and things improved and just got a bit better. And they were so generous, those folk. They looked after us like as if we were royalty. And I got the bike. I had to go and have it tested, well not tested but examined by the Australian authorities, and I had to have an Australian number plate, which I still got. It's up in the man cave as a reminder of that, and that's looking across the Swan River towards Perth, the city of Perth, from the block of flats we eventually moved into. And I met quite a few grand folk, had several jobs, one of which was installing septic tanks. But it is worthy of a tale, because in Western Australia there is no real sanitary system. Every house has got its own septic tank because it's all built on sand, and every house has probably a quarter of an acre of garden. They are huge gardens in the suburbs, and this fella Arthur and me, we used to set to and dig a hole in their garden. When the land got saturated with effluent, we had to put another soakaway in, and these are about 6 foot, 6 or 7 foot. You're out of sight a bit, but we used to set to and dig them out of the sand. The biggest job was cutting through the grass, buffalo grass. You had to have an axe to chop through the turf, take the turf off, and then because I could shovel left-handed and he could shovel right-handed, we could dig down there, I'm not joking, in not long, and we had our little system where we dug down so far and then one finished it off while the other brought all the materials in. And they're just like castellated curbstones. Arthur would build these things up, put a lid on, and then we would the interesting bit was breaking into the one that was overflowing. That was done with some speed and not much delicacy, I can assure you, because all these contents went into the new soak away, and that would do it for another few years. And we could do 3 of those a day, but we were young, we were fit, and it was good money. So that went on for a month or two, and time passed, and then eventually two of the lads out of the camper van, they decided that they bought an old Holden car, a quite good truck actually, a little bit like a Hillman Minx to look at, but sort of more robust, built for the Australian outback, of course. And they were set off, and I went with them, and we set off and travelled right down to the very southwest of Western Australia, where we had this lean looking person, and that's like a viewing point on the top of that tree, and I'll tell you, it's a long way up, but we went up just to have a look and got some pictures of the surrounding countryside. There's some archway on the very southwestern part of Western Australia, and it's called Bunbury. And we were quite taken with this, where the seas eroded underneath, and it's like a land bridge thing. It was a spectacular place, and we just slowly travelled round, up, started to climb up. Well, I think the part of the Australian coastline is called the Great Australian Bight, but we went up to Kalgoorlie and another place called Coolgardie, and then set off across the Nullarbor Desert, and that's another story altogether. My God, 300 miles I did on the day, unsurfaced, and you didn't ride on the road because there's stuff called bull dust, and it's just like talcum powder, and wagons not there just rode over it, and cars, some cars come to grief, but if you hit one of these, but there weren't potholes, there were small craters, with the motorbike you would be over the handlebars. So I spent 300 miles more or less on either side of what was laughingly described as a road, and the dust was phenomenal. And the way I had to do it was, if you saw a truck and a trailer come in and the prevailing wind was from the south, say, you went onto the south so that you kept out of all the dust, and equally if it was the other way, the dust, you just went on the side where all the dust wasn't. And we eventually made it across to South Australia. Quite funny, they were very strict even in those days. You could not take any fruit or vegetables or anything out of Central Australia into South Australia, because they were very strict on disease control. And eventually made it down to Adelaide, and eventually down to Melbourne, and laughingly it was snowing the day we rode to Melbourne. Well, the day I rode, along with these lads in their Holden car, and I used to just take a trip out in the countryside, and that was Victoria countryside, a fabulous place, really. There's a lot. The laughable thing is, the best bit of Australia is from Melbourne up through Sydney to Brisbane and up to the Gold Coast, and we never saw any of that. We just saw the boring bits, but it was still very, very spectacular all the same. And then after a few months, we got jobs, of course. We worked a bit in Adelaide, and then we worked in Melbourne, and Tony, a lad from Newport in South Wales, we talked each other into flying home, and that was the last. Well, it wasn't the last I saw of Australia, because I've flown over it since, but a long journey home to Athens in Greece, and then a shorter hop back to the UK. And to my absolute amazement, and well, partly down to my own neglect, I've never met any of the people who were on that trip apart from Clive. Where they've all gone their own way, they're likely settled abroad or married, or probably someone might even be dead, heaven forbid. But that sort of brought us neatly back to Blighty, shipped the old Norton back to London, and about 8 weeks later I got a letter to say the bike was cleared for collection in the docks in London, and I got on I think they were called Gay Hostess bus. They were like double-decker things, and they were like express bus down I went to London, and of course you had to take all the petrol and everything out, and I took a bottle with maybe 2 litres of petrol in, tipped it into the tank, and by gum dole, that's fired up. And I just tidied it up, fixed its handlebars at right spot, and set to and just rode it back to Middle Row, to that very farm that journey started. Nearly a year before. It was August when we got back to England. So yeah, the journey was just shy of a year, but that including working in Australia quite a while. And how we managed that I'll never know, but manage it we did. And since then, of course, people have done some extraordinary feats of travel. People have actually walked around the world. How that does and how many years that takes, I don't know. But then, when you look at the world now, then it wasn't a hard thing to do. The only bureaucracy we came across was in India, trying to get into India, and really the whole thing is unattainable now because of the predicament we are in with global conflicts, and hopefully they will be resolved, and plenty of other people could do exactly that journey. So I hope it's been of some interest. Thinking back, we must have been absolutely mad, but no matter, you have to just, these things, it demanded to be done, I suppose, and yeah, left a big impression on me, and yeah, I've travelled all over the world since then in various forms, but not so far on the motorbike. I still ride the motorbike. I have a very important birthday coming up soon and still manage to ride the bike, which I have in my shed, and yeah, that'll be a family heirloom, I suppose. 827 JJH.